Sarah Martinez had always been different from the other kids at Riverside High School. While her classmates spent their weekends at the mall or hanging out at coffee shops, she was at the local Army recruitment center, learning about military history and tactical strategies. Her bedroom walls were covered with maps of famous battles, pictures of military aircraft, and recruitment posters that most teenagers would never give a second glance. The 17-year-old had dreams that stretched far beyond the small town of Riverside. She wanted to serve her country, to fly helicopters, and to make a difference in the world. But her classmates didn't understand her passion. They saw her military-style clothing, her perfectly polished combat boots, and her disciplined demeanor as strange and out of place in their casual high school environment. Every morning, Sarah would arrive at school wearing her ROTC uniform with pride. The olive green fabric was always pressed to perfection. Her boots shined until they reflected like mirrors, and her posture remained straight and confident. She had earned every single merit badge and ribbon that decorated her uniform through months of hard work, early morning drills, and weekend training exercises that most of her peers couldn't even imagine enduring. The mockery started small at first. Whispered comments in the hallways about the girl who thinks she's a soldier and snickers when she walked past groups of students. Some called her G.I. Jane or Army Girl, in a tone that made it clear they didn't mean it as a compliment. The popular crowd, led by Madison Cooper and her circle of friends, seemed to take particular pleasure in making Sarah feel like an outsider. Madison was everything Sarah wasn't in the eyes of their classmates. She was head cheerleader, prom queen candidate, and came from one of the wealthiest families in town. Her father owned the largest car dealership in the county, and she drove a brand new convertible that cost more than most families made in a year. Madison's world revolved around fashion, social media followers, and maintaining her position at the top of the school's social hierarchy. The contrast between the two girls couldn't have been more striking. While Madison spent her free time getting manicures and planning parties, Sarah was learning map reading, first aid, and leadership skills. When Madison was posting selfies on Instagram, Sarah was studying military strategy and practicing drill commands. Their different life paths seemed to put them on opposite sides of an invisible war that neither had declared but both were fighting. The situation escalated during lunch periods in the school cafeteria. Sarah would sit alone at a corner table, reading military journals or working on homework, while groups of students would point and whisper. Sometimes they would make loud comments meant for her to hear, questioning why anyone would want to play soldier, or suggesting that she was just trying to get attention. The jokes became more frequent and more cruel as weeks passed. Sarah's few friends tried to defend her, but they were outnumbered by the critics. Her best friend Jessica often told her to ignore the comments and focus on her goals, but it was becoming increasingly difficult. Every day felt like walking through a minefield of judgment and ridicule. The girl who could march for miles without complaint was finding it harder to walk through the school hallways with confidence. The breaking point came during the annual spring carnival that the school organized every year. It was supposed to be a fun event where students could enjoy games, food, and entertainment on the school's large athletic field. Sarah had volunteered to help with security and crowd control, wearing her ROTC uniform as she had been instructed by her commanding officer. As she walked across the field, checking on different activity stations and making sure everything was running smoothly, she heard the familiar sound of laughter behind her. This time it was louder and more public than ever before. Madison and her friends were standing near the dunking booth, pointing at Sarah and making exaggerated military salutes while laughing hysterically. "Look, it's our little soldier girl," Madison called out loud enough for everyone nearby to hear. "Maybe she thinks the enemy is going to attack the cotton candy stand." Her friends erupted in laughter, and soon other students began to gather around to see what was so funny. Sarah felt her cheeks burn with embarrassment as more students joined in the mockery. Someone shouted, "Hey Sarah, where's your tank?" while another person made sound effects like they were shooting an imaginary rifle. The laughter grew louder and more widespread as the crowd of onlookers increased. For a moment, Sarah considered walking away, finding somewhere to hide until the carnival was over. Her hands trembled slightly as she stood there, surrounded by the sound of ridicule from people she had to see every day. The uniform that usually made her feel proud and confident suddenly felt like a target painted on her back. But instead of retreating, Sarah straightened her shoulders and lifted her chin higher. She had trained for difficult situations, and this was just another challenge to overcome. She continued her assigned duties, checking on each station methodically, even as the laughter and comments continued around her. What none of the laughing students knew was that Sarah's dedication to military training was about to pay off in a way that none of them could have imagined. Her weekend training exercises weren't just games or attempts to get attention. She had been working with real military personnel, learning real skills, and earning real recognition from people who understood the value of her commitment. The carnival continued around her as Sarah maintained her composure and professionalism. She had no idea that this day would become a turning point, not just in how her classmates saw her, but in how she saw herself. Sometimes the people who laugh the loudest are the ones who understand the least about what real strength and dedication look like. As the afternoon sun beat down on the athletic field, Sarah had no way of knowing that her years of training and preparation were about to be put to a test that would silence every critic and change everything she thought she knew about her place in the world. The mockery continued as the carnival reached its peak attendance. More families had arrived with their children, and the athletic field was now crowded with people enjoying the various games and activities. Sarah tried to focus on her volunteer duties, but the constant whispers and pointed fingers made it difficult to concentrate on anything else. Madison's group had grown larger, attracting students who wanted to be part of the popular crowd's entertainment. They had positioned themselves near the main entrance, where they could be seen by as many people as possible. Every few minutes, one of them would make another comment about Sarah's uniform or her serious demeanor, causing fresh waves of laughter from their expanding audience. "I bet she sleeps in that uniform," Madison said loudly, causing her friends to giggle. "Probably has military bedsheets too." The jokes were getting meaner, and Sarah could feel the stares of younger students who were starting to join in the laughter without even understanding what was so funny. Sarah's supervising teacher, Mrs. Thompson, noticed the situation developing and approached her. Mrs. Thompson was one of the few faculty members who truly understood Sarah's dedication and had always been supportive of her military aspirations. She had served in the Air Force herself many years ago and recognized the genuine commitment that Sarah showed every day. "Sarah, you're doing an excellent job managing the security checks," Mrs. Thompson said quietly, positioning herself so that her back was to the group of laughing students. "Don't let them get to you. What you're doing here matters, and your discipline is something they could learn from." Sarah nodded gratefully, but the words of encouragement felt small against the wave of public humiliation she was experiencing. She had dealt with individual comments before, but never anything this public and sustained. The entire school seemed to be watching her, waiting to see how she would react to the ongoing ridicule. As the afternoon progressed, the situation became even more uncomfortable. Some of the younger students, trying to impress the older kids, started following Sarah around the field and mimicking her walk. They would march behind her in exaggerated formation, calling out mock military commands like left, right, left, in high-pitched voices that drew even more attention to her. Parents who were attending the carnival began to notice the commotion. Some looked disapproving of the students' behavior, but others seemed amused by the spectacle. Sarah overheard one mother saying to another, "That poor girl takes herself so seriously. Maybe this will help her learn to lighten up a little." The comment stung more than all the student laughter combined. Even adults were viewing her dedication as something that needed to be corrected rather than respected. Sarah began to question whether she was indeed taking things too seriously, whether her dreams of military service were just childish fantasies that everyone else could see through but her. By mid-afternoon, the mockery had taken on a life of its own. Someone had started a social media hashtag about the event, and students were taking pictures and videos to share online. Sarah realized that this humiliation wouldn't end when the carnival was over. It would follow her into cyberspace and potentially last forever. She found herself standing near the edge of the field, looking out at the tree line beyond the school property. For the first time since she had started her military training, Sarah seriously considered quitting. Maybe everyone was right. Maybe she was just a small-town girl with unrealistic dreams who was making herself look ridiculous by playing dress-up in military gear. The doubt crept into her mind like poison, undermining years of confidence and determination. She thought about all the early morning training sessions, the weekend exercises, the hours spent studying military history and strategy. Had it all been a waste of time? Was she really just the delusional teenager that everyone seemed to think she was? Just as Sarah was reaching her lowest point, something unexpected happened. Her phone buzzed with a text message from Sergeant Rodriguez, her ROTC instructor and mentor. The message was brief but perfectly timed. Remember what we talked about regarding mental toughness. Today's training never ends. How you handle adversity defines who you become. The message reminded Sarah of a conversation they had had several weeks earlier about the psychological challenges that military personnel face. Sergeant Rodriguez had explained that the ability to maintain composure and focus under pressure wasn't just useful in combat situations. It was essential for everyday life as well. Sarah straightened her shoulders and took a deep breath. She realized that this moment was exactly the kind of test that her training had been preparing her for. The laughter and mockery weren't gunfire or explosions, but they were still a form of adversity that required the same mental strength to overcome. With renewed determination, Sarah returned to her assigned duties. She checked on the game stations with even more thoroughness than before, ensuring that every safety protocol was being followed and that all the equipment was properly maintained. Her movements became more precise and professional, as if she were demonstrating to invisible observers that she was indeed qualified for the responsibilities she had been given. The change in her demeanor was noticeable. Instead of looking embarrassed or defensive, Sarah now carried herself with quiet confidence. She spoke clearly and authoritatively when giving directions to other volunteers, and she handled every small crisis that arose with calm efficiency. Some of the adults who were supervising different carnival activities began to take notice of her professionalism. The principal, Mr. Davis, commented to Mrs. Thompson that Sarah seemed to have excellent leadership potential and was handling her responsibilities better than many of the adult volunteers. As the sun began to lower in the sky, casting longer shadows across the athletic field, Sarah had no idea that her day was about to take a dramatic turn. The training she had received, the discipline she had developed, and the commitment she had shown were all about to be put to a test that none of her classmates could have imagined. The mockery continued around her, but Sarah was no longer listening to it. She was focused on her duties, on maintaining the standards she had set for herself, and on proving, if only to herself, that her dedication was real and valuable, regardless of what anyone else thought about it. The afternoon was beginning to wind down when the first sign of trouble appeared. Sarah was conducting her final security check near the parking area when she noticed a small crowd gathering around one of the game booths. At first, she thought, it might be another group forming to make fun of her, but the body language of the people was different, urgent and concerned rather than mocking. As she approached the scene, Sarah could hear someone crying. Pushing through the small crowd, she saw 8-year-old Tommy Chen sitting on the ground, his face pale and his breathing labored. His mother was kneeling beside him, frantically searching through her purse while calling his name repeatedly. His inhaler, Mrs. Chen was saying to anyone who would listen. I can't find his inhaler anywhere. He's having an asthma attack and I can't find it. Her voice was rising with panic as Tommy's breathing became more difficult and his lips started to take on a bluish tint. The adults around them seemed frozen with uncertainty. Some were offering suggestions about where the inhaler might be. Others were calling for someone to find the school nurse, but no one seemed to know what immediate action to take. Tommy's condition was clearly deteriorating, and every second of delay was making the situation more dangerous. Without hesitation, Sarah dropped to her knees beside Tommy. Her military training had included extensive first aid instruction, and she recognized the signs of a severe asthma attack immediately. She had learned that, in emergency situations, clear thinking and quick action were more valuable than panic or good intentions. Tommy, I need you to look at me, Sarah said in a calm, steady voice that cut through the surrounding chaos. I'm going to help you breathe better, okay? I need you to try to stay calm and follow my instructions. Sarah positioned Tommy in an upright sitting position and loosened his shirt collar to make breathing easier. She then began coaching him through controlled breathing exercises that she had learned during her emergency response training. Breathe in slowly through your nose, she instructed, demonstrating the technique herself. Hold it for just a second, then breathe out slowly through your mouth. While helping Tommy with his breathing, Sarah was also assessing the situation and formulating a plan. She knew that getting professional medical help was crucial, but she also understood that the immediate priority was keeping Tommy stable until that help could arrive. Someone needs to call 911 right now, Sarah directed to the crowd, her voice carrying the authority of someone trained to take charge in emergency situations. Tell them we have a child with a severe asthma attack who needs immediate medical attention. She pointed to a specific adult. You, go find the school nurse and bring her here immediately. The crowd, which had been milling around uncertainly, suddenly sprang into action. Sarah's clear directions and confident demeanor gave everyone else permission to stop panicking and start helping. Cell phones came out, people ran to find the nurse, and the chaotic scene began to organize itself around Sarah's leadership. Mrs. Chen looked at Sarah with a mixture of gratitude and amazement. "Are you trained for this?" she asked, still holding Tommy's hand but now looking more hopeful than panicked. "Yes, ma'am," Sarah replied simply, continuing to monitor Tommy's breathing and vital signs. "I've had extensive first aid and emergency response training. Tommy's going to be okay, but we need to keep him calm and stable until the paramedics arrive." As word of the emergency spread through the carnival, more people began to gather around the scene. Among them were some of the same students who had been mocking Sarah just minutes earlier. Madison and her friends pushed through the crowd, curious about what was happening, but their expressions changed dramatically when they saw Sarah taking charge of a serious medical emergency. The girl they had been laughing at was now the most competent person in a crisis situation. While adults stood around looking helpless and uncertain, Sarah was calm, focused, and clearly knew exactly what she was doing. Her military training wasn't just dress up or pretend games. It was real preparation for real situations where people's lives could depend on having the right skills and knowledge. Tommy's breathing began to stabilize under Sarah's guidance. The controlled breathing exercises were helping him get more oxygen, and her calm presence was reducing his anxiety, which in turn was making the asthma attack less severe. Color was returning to his face, and he was able to speak in short sentences. "My chest feels better," Tommy whispered to Sarah, looking up at her with the trust that children instinctively give to adults who make them feel safe. "You're doing great, Tommy," Sarah encouraged him. "The ambulance will be here soon, and they'll have medicine that will make you feel even better. You're being very brave." The school nurse arrived and immediately took in the scene. She had expected to find chaos and panic, but instead, she found a well-organized emergency response with Sarah clearly in control of the situation. "What's his current status?" the nurse asked Sarah, treating her as a fellow professional rather than just a student volunteer. Sarah gave a clear, concise report of Tommy's condition, the intervention she had provided, and the timeline of events. Her report was so thorough and professional that several adults in the crowd exchanged surprised glances. This wasn't the behavior they expected from a teenager, especially not the teenager they had been watching get mocked and laughed at all afternoon. In the distance, the sound of sirens could be heard approaching the school. The paramedics would arrive soon, but Sarah's quick thinking and training had already made the difference between a manageable situation and a potential tragedy. Tommy was stable. His mother was calmer, and the entire emergency was under control. As the sirens grew louder, Sarah remained focused on Tommy, continuing to monitor his condition and provide reassurance. She didn't notice the way the crowd was looking at her now, with respect instead of ridicule, with admiration instead of amusement. The same students who had been making jokes about her military gear were now seeing firsthand why that training mattered. The girl they had dismissed as playing soldier had just demonstrated real leadership, real competence, and real courage when it mattered most. The laughter had stopped completely, replaced by a growing awareness that they had seriously misjudged someone whose skills and dedication had just potentially saved a child's life. The paramedics arrived within minutes, their ambulance pulling directly onto the athletic field with lights flashing and sirens wailing. As they approached the scene with their emergency equipment, they found a surprisingly well-organized situation waiting for them. Instead of the chaos they typically encountered at school emergencies, they discovered a calm, controlled environment with one person clearly in charge. Sarah stood up as the lead paramedic approached, but she remained close to Tommy to provide continuity of care. 8-year-old male severe asthma attack that started approximately 15 minutes ago, she reported immediately. No inhaler available on scene. Patient was experiencing difficulty breathing and cyanosis around the lips when I first assessed him. I've had him in an upright position doing controlled breathing exercises, and his condition has stabilized. The paramedic, a veteran with over 20 years of experience, was visibly impressed by Sarah's professional report. "Are you EMT certified?" he asked, assuming she must have formal medical training. "No, sir, but I have extensive first aid and emergency response training through my ROTC program," Sarah replied. "I maintained constant monitoring of his breathing, pulse, and responsiveness while waiting for your arrival." The paramedic nodded approvingly and immediately began his own assessment of Tommy's condition. Everything Sarah had told him proved to be accurate, and her interventions had clearly helped prevent the situation from becoming much worse. "You did excellent work here," he told Sarah quietly. "Your quick response and proper care probably saved this kid from a much more serious emergency." As the paramedics took over Tommy's care, preparing him for transport to the hospital, Mrs. Chen approached Sarah with tears in her eyes. "I don't know how to thank you," she said, her voice trembling with emotion. "If you hadn't been here, if you hadn't known what to do, I don't even want to think about what might have happened." Sarah felt a warm sense of satisfaction, but she remained humble about her role. "I'm just glad I could help," she said simply. "Tommy was very brave, and you did everything right by staying calm and letting us work." The crowd that had gathered to watch the emergency began to disperse as Tommy was loaded into the ambulance. He was breathing normally now and even managed to wave goodbye to Sarah as the paramedics prepared to transport him to the hospital for further evaluation. The immediate crisis was over, but the impact of what had just happened was only beginning to settle in. Madison and her friends stood at the edge of the dispersing crowd, looking uncomfortable and unsure of themselves. The girl they had been mocking just hours earlier had demonstrated capabilities that none of them possessed. Sarah had handled a life-threatening emergency with the kind of competence and leadership that adults twice her age had failed to show. "That was really impressive," Jessica whispered to Madison, her voice uncertain. She was beginning to realize that their afternoon of entertainment at Sarah's expense now seemed cruel and petty in light of what they had just witnessed. Madison didn't respond immediately. She was struggling with feelings she wasn't used to experiencing: embarrassment, regret, and a growing awareness that she had been completely wrong about Sarah. The military training that had seemed so ridiculous and attention-seeking had just proven to be incredibly valuable and potentially life-saving. As the ambulance drove away, Principal Davis approached Sarah. He had watched the entire emergency response unfold and was clearly impressed by what he had seen. "Sarah, I want to thank you for your exceptional performance today," he said formally. "Your training and quick thinking made all the difference in this situation." News of Sarah's heroic actions began to spread throughout the carnival. Parents who had witnessed the emergency were talking about the remarkable young woman who had taken charge when everyone else was paralyzed by panic. The story grew in the telling, but the core facts remained the same. Sarah Martinez had used her military training to handle a serious emergency with professional competence. Mrs. Thompson found Sarah as she was preparing to resume her volunteer duties. "I think you can consider your service for today complete," she said with a proud smile. "You've done more than enough, and what you did for that little boy was extraordinary." Sarah appreciated the recognition, but she was also feeling the emotional weight of what had just happened. The adrenaline was wearing off, and she was beginning to process the full significance of the emergency. She had trained for situations like this, but experiencing it in real life was different from any simulation or exercise. As she walked across the field toward the parking area, Sarah noticed that the atmosphere around her had completely changed. Instead of whispers and laughter, she was receiving nods of respect and acknowledgement from students and adults alike. People were looking at her differently now, not as the weird girl who played soldier, but as someone who had proven her worth when it really mattered. The transformation was remarkable, but Sarah was too emotionally drained to fully appreciate it yet. She had gone from being the object of ridicule to being recognized as a hero in the span of just a few hours. The same uniform that had made her a target for mockery had now become a symbol of her competence and preparedness. Near the parking area, Sarah's phone buzzed with a text message from Sergeant Rodriguez. Word of the emergency had already reached him through the school's communication network. "Heard about your excellent work today. This is exactly why we train, to be ready when others need us. Very proud of your performance under pressure." Reading the message, Sarah felt a sense of validation that went beyond the praise she had received from everyone else. Her mentor's approval meant that she had lived up to the standards of the military training she had worked so hard to master. She had proven to herself and to everyone else that her dedication was justified and valuable. But even as Sarah was beginning to feel proud of her actions, she had no idea that the day's events were far from over. The emergency response had been just the beginning of what would become the most transformative day of her high school career. The skills she had demonstrated were about to be put to an even more dramatic test, one that would change everything about how her classmates, and she herself, viewed her military aspirations. As the carnival was beginning to wind down in the early evening, Sarah was helping to pack up equipment when her phone rang. The caller ID showed Sergeant Rodriguez, which was unusual since he rarely called during weekend events unless something important was happening. "Sarah, I need you to listen carefully," Sergeant Rodriguez said, his voice carrying an urgency that immediately got her full attention. "There's been a hiking accident in the state forest about 10 miles from your school. A group of college students were rock climbing when one of them fell and is seriously injured in a location that's extremely difficult for ground rescue teams to reach." Sarah felt her heart rate increase as she processed the information. She knew the state forest area well from her weekend training exercises, and she understood how treacherous some of the terrain could be, especially for inexperienced climbers. "The injured person is on a narrow ledge about 60 feet up a cliff face," Sergeant Rodriguez continued. "Emergency responders need someone with specific training to help coordinate the rescue operation. The state rescue team has requested military assistance, and I recommended you based on your excellent performance in our high-angle rescue training exercises." Sarah's mind raced as she considered what she was being asked to do. The high-angle rescue training she had completed was among the most challenging and technical aspects of her military preparation. It required not only physical skills, but also the ability to remain calm and focused while working in extremely dangerous conditions. "I understand the seriousness of the situation, Sergeant," Sarah replied, her voice steady despite the adrenaline coursing through her system. "What exactly would you need me to do?" "A military helicopter is being dispatched to your location to pick you up and transport you to the rescue site," Sergeant Rodriguez explained. "You would serve as a technical advisor to help coordinate the rescue operation. Your knowledge of the terrain and your high-angle rescue training make you uniquely qualified to assist with this mission." The magnitude of what was being asked hit Sarah like a physical force. A real military helicopter was coming to get her. She was being called upon to help save someone's life in a situation that required the exact skills she had been training to develop. This wasn't a drill or an exercise. It was a real emergency where her preparation could make the difference between life and death for another person. "I'll be ready," Sarah said without hesitation. "How long until the helicopter arrives?" "Approximately 20 minutes," Sergeant Rodriguez replied. "The pilot will need a clear landing zone of at least 100 feet in diameter with no overhead obstacles. Can you secure an appropriate area at your school?" Sarah looked out across the athletic field where the carnival was still winding down. The field was large enough and clear enough to serve as a helicopter landing zone, but she would need to coordinate with school officials to clear the area and ensure everyone's safety. "Yes, Sergeant. The athletic field will work perfectly. I'll coordinate with school administration to clear the area and establish a safe perimeter." "Excellent. Sarah, this is the kind of situation that tests everything you've learned. Stay focused, trust your training, and remember that lives depend on your performance. I have complete confidence in your abilities." After hanging up, Sarah immediately sought out Principal Davis to explain the situation. His initial reaction was one of surprise and concern, but as Sarah described the emergency and her role in the rescue operation, his expression changed to one of respect and determination to help. "Of course we'll clear the field," Principal Davis said immediately. "What do you need us to do?" Sarah's military training took over as she began organizing the helicopter landing operation. She directed school staff to move all remaining carnival equipment away from the center of the field and to establish a safety perimeter that would keep all civilians at a safe distance from the helicopter when it landed. Word of the incoming military helicopter spread quickly through the remaining carnival attendees. Students and parents who had been preparing to leave suddenly found themselves witnessing something extraordinary. The girl who had been mocked earlier in the Day was now coordinating a real military operation on their school's athletic field. Madison and her friends watched in stunned silence as Sarah transformed before their eyes. Gone was any trace of the embarrassed teenager they had been laughing at just hours earlier. In her place was a confident, competent young woman who was giving orders to adults and preparing to participate in a life-or-death rescue mission. "I can't believe this is really happening," Jessica whispered to Madison. "She's actually going on a real military mission." Madison didn't respond. She was too busy processing the complete reversal of everything she thought she knew about Sarah Martinez. The girl she had dismissed as playing dress-up was about to board a military helicopter to help save someone's life. The uniform that had seemed like a costume was now clearly the mark of someone with real training and real responsibilities. As the designated time approached, Sarah could hear the distinctive sound of helicopter rotors in the distance. The noise grew steadily louder until a Black Hawk helicopter appeared over the tree line, approaching the school with precision and power that left everyone on the ground awestruck. The helicopter was massive, painted in military olive green with official markings that made it clear this was not a training exercise or demonstration. This was a real military aircraft on a real mission, and it was coming to pick up a 17-year-old high school student because her skills were needed to help save someone's life. Sarah felt a mix of excitement and nervousness as she watched the helicopter approach. This was the moment she had been training for throughout her entire high school career. All the early morning drills, the weekend exercises, the studying, and the discipline were about to be put to the ultimate test in a real-world situation where failure was not an option. The crowd of onlookers pressed against the safety perimeter that had been established, everyone wanting to witness this unprecedented event. Parents pulled out their phones to record the landing, while students stood in amazed silence as they realized they were about to watch one of their classmates board a military helicopter. As the Black Hawk began its final approach to the athletic field, Sarah straightened her uniform one last time and prepared to step into a role that would prove, once and for all, that her dedication to military service was not just a teenage phase or attention-seeking behavior, but a serious commitment that had prepared her for exactly this kind of moment. The Black Hawk helicopter touched down on the athletic field with a thunderous roar that could be heard for miles around. The powerful downdraft from its rotors sent dust and debris swirling across the field, creating a dramatic scene that looked like something from a movie, rather than a high school carnival. As the engines wound down slightly, a crew chief jumped out of the helicopter and jogged toward where Sarah was waiting. He was a professional soldier, clearly experienced and competent, but he showed no surprise at seeing a teenager in military uniform ready to board his aircraft. "Are you Martinez?" he called out over the noise of the helicopter. "Yes, Staff Sergeant," Sarah replied, using proper military protocol and raising her voice to be heard over the rotor noise. "Outstanding. We've been briefed on your qualifications. Time is critical, so we need to move fast. Are you ready to go?" Sarah nodded firmly and followed the crew chief toward the helicopter. As she approached the aircraft, she could feel the eyes of everyone at the carnival watching her every move. The same students who had been laughing at her just hours earlier were now witnessing her board a real military helicopter for a real rescue mission. Inside the helicopter, Sarah was introduced to the other members of the rescue team. There was the pilot, a major with over 15 years of flying experience, a rescue specialist who would coordinate the ground operation, and a medic who would provide emergency care once the injured climber was reached. "Martinez, we've reviewed your training records," the rescue specialist said as Sarah strapped herself into her seat. "Your high-angle rescue certification and your knowledge of the local terrain make you a valuable addition to this team. We're counting on your expertise to help us get to this person safely and quickly." As the helicopter lifted off from the school field, Sarah looked down at the crowd of people who had gathered to watch. She could see Madison and her friends standing at the edge of the field, looking up at the departing aircraft with expressions of complete amazement. The transformation from mockery to respect was now complete and undeniable. The flight to the rescue site took only 12 minutes, but it gave Sarah time to review the mission details and prepare mentally for what lay ahead. The injured climber was a 22-year-old college student who had fallen approximately 15 feet before catching himself on a narrow ledge. He had sustained what appeared to be a broken leg and possibly internal injuries, and his position made it impossible for traditional ground rescue teams to reach him safely. When they arrived at the forest, Sarah could see the complexity of the rescue operation immediately. The cliff face was nearly vertical, with the injured climber visible as a small figure on a ledge that looked impossibly narrow and precarious from the air. Ground rescue teams had already established a base camp, but they were struggling with the technical challenges of reaching the victim. Sarah was lowered from the helicopter with the rescue specialist to assess the situation and develop a plan. Her training had prepared her for exactly this kind of scenario, and she quickly identified the safest approach route and the equipment that would be needed for the rescue. The ledge is stable enough to support a rescue operation. Sarah reported to the team leader after completing her assessment, but will need to establish 2 separate anchor points and use a complex pulley system to safely extract the victim without putting additional stress on the rock face. Her technical knowledge impressed the experienced rescue professionals who were working with her. They had expected to have to explain everything to the young volunteer, but instead they found themselves working with someone who understood the intricacies of high-angle rescue operations as well as some veterans with years of experience. The rescue operation took nearly 3 hours to complete successfully. Sarah played a crucial role in rigging the rope systems and coordinating the complex maneuvers needed to safely extract the injured climber from the cliff face. Her calm demeanor and technical expertise helped ensure that what could have been a tragic accident became a successful rescue mission. When the injured student was finally brought to safety and loaded into a medical helicopter for transport to the hospital, the rescue team leader approached Sarah with obvious respect and admiration. "Martinez, that was exceptional work," he said, shaking her hand firmly. "I've worked with professional rescue technicians who couldn't have handled that operation better than you did today. Your training has prepared you well for this kind of work." The flight back to Riverside High School felt different from the outbound journey. Sarah was no longer the nervous teenager hoping to prove herself. She was now a proven member of a professional rescue team who had helped save someone's life in a challenging and dangerous situation. As the Black Hawk approached the school for the second time that evening, Sarah could see that word of the successful rescue had already spread. The athletic field was now crowded with people who had come specifically to witness her return. Local news crews had arrived, and the parking lot was filled with cars belonging to people who wanted to be part of this historic moment in their small town's history. When the helicopter landed and Sarah stepped out, she was greeted by spontaneous applause from the crowd that had gathered. Students, teachers, parents, and community members were all clapping and cheering for the girl who had just returned from a real military rescue mission. Principal Davis was the first to reach her as she walked away from the helicopter. "Sarah, the entire community is proud of what you've accomplished today," he said, his voice filled with emotion. "You've shown us all what real dedication and preparation can achieve." As Sarah made her way through the crowd, she found herself face to face with Madison and her group of friends. The girls who had been laughing at her uniform just hours earlier now looked at her with a mixture of awe and embarrassment. "Sarah, Madison began, then stopped, clearly struggling to find the right words. "I owe you an apology, we all do. What you did today was incredible, and we were completely wrong about you." Sarah looked at Madison and her friends, remembering the mockery and laughter that had hurt so much earlier in the day. But instead of anger or resentment, she felt only a quiet sense of vindication and perhaps a little sympathy for girls who were just beginning to understand that there was more to life than popularity and social status. "Thank you," Sarah said simply. "I appreciate that." The local news reporter approached Sarah for an interview, and soon she found herself explaining to a television audience how her military training had prepared her for the day's events. She spoke about the importance of discipline, preparation, and service to others, and her words carried the weight of someone who had just proven those principles in the most dramatic way possible. As the evening wound down and the crowds began to disperse, Sarah finally had a moment to reflect on everything that had happened. In the span of a single day, she had gone from being the target of cruel jokes to being recognized as a local hero. The uniform that had made her a laughingstock in the morning had become a symbol of competence and courage by evening. But perhaps most importantly, Sarah had proven to herself that her dedication to military service was not just a teenage dream, but a real calling that had already made a difference in the lives of others. She had saved Tommy Chen from a medical emergency and helped rescue an injured climber from a dangerous situation. Her training had been put to the test in real-world scenarios, and she had passed with flying colors. As she walked across the now quiet athletic field toward her car, Sarah's phone buzzed with a text message from Sergeant Rodriguez. Outstanding performance today, Martinez. You've proven that you have what it takes to serve at the highest levels. Consider this your unofficial graduation from training to active duty mindset. Sarah smiled as she read the message. Tomorrow she would return to being a regular high school student, but she would never again doubt the value of her military training or the importance of her goals. The girl who had been laughed at for wearing military gear had just demonstrated why that gear and everything it represented mattered more than anyone had imagined. The Black Hawk helicopter lifted off one final time, disappearing into the darkening sky as Sarah drove home, forever changed by a day that had transformed her from an object of ridicule into a proven hero whose dedication had quite literally helped save lives.